Hey guys, it's Jamie. Today I wanted to do a little demonstration of CSS for beginners, and this will just walk you through like what are the most basic CSS styles and what do they do, how do you use them, how can you practice them. So let's get into it. Okay, so first let's get some HTML down. So I'm going to make a div here, and it's going to say hello world or something like that, something uninspired. So refresh that, hello world, great. So the first attribute we're going to look at is called the display property. And to illustrate it, I'm going to place another div here, have it also say hello world. So when we refresh, we see that hello world is on both lines. So if you open the developer tools, on Mac that's Command-Alt-I, and on Windows that's Control-Alt-I, as well as Linux. So basically these first elements here, each of them is a div, which means that by default its display CSS property is set to block. See here in the right hand panel. I have the elements displayed and this div is selected, and you can see that it spans the entire row, and its display property is set to block. Okay, but if I went and set that display to like inline, as well as the other one below that. So when the display is inline, it's kind of just what it sounds like. They're in the same line. Like it doesn't have a new line after it, and it doesn't span the entire row or the entire width of the element that it's in. So something interesting to note here is that by default, divs are display block. So the way we can change all of the divs on this particular component is by going in the CSS. You have to do a selector on the div element as opposed to a class name. So that looks like this. So this is an element selector, and an element is just this right here, this div. Whereas if this had a class, like class equals hello, so if we wanted to style just that class, then we would use a class selector in the CSS, and that would look something like this, dot hello. So the dot signifies that it's a class. But for now, we'll just ignore that, and then I wanted to show you that the divs can be set to display inline from here in the CSS, and then as soon as we reload the page, we'll see that they're again inline. So like before, we were just editing the display property here inside of the web page. It wasn't actually changed in our app. But then when we made this change here, and then we reloaded the page, we made sure that the CSS really works. You always want to do that. You don't want to just edit it on the page, because then your changes will be lost. Alright, now let's do a selector for the class hello, which, like I said before, is on the first hello in our page. So selecting on hello, let's look at the color CSS property. So if I set the color to red, then that will do just what it sounds like. It'll set the text color to be red. And now there are two colors. Actually, there's a color which is referring to the text color, and there's a background color which is referring to the space around the text, all surrounding it. So if I set that to gray, then we'll see what that looks like. Now it's gray. Alright, and another thing I wanted to show you is that if we change these divs to spans instead of divs, we'll see that the display inline is automatically applied. So spans are almost exactly like divs, except for they have a different display property. So that's just a quick shortcut in case you don't want to create a class and style a particular element. You can just set it to be a span, and then voila, basically by default spans are display inline. Alright, now I'm going to change this span back to divs and then undo those other changes because I want to work with divs for now. So we'll change these back to divs and everything should be back to normal. There we go. Okay, so another CSS style I want to show you guys is padding. So if I give this div a padding of 32 pixels, we can see what that looks like over here. So within the hierarchy of like what can be shown in an element, there's the margin, which is outside of it, and then there's the border, which is like I'll show you another one right now. So if I give this one a border of 1 pixel wide, solid yellow. So now you can see there's this bright yellow border around the whole thing. Maybe I'll increase the size as well. Alright, so going back to the diagram, the margin is on the outside, so we'll give it some margin. We'll give it like margin of 16 px. Px stands for pixels, by the way. So when I hover over margin here, you can see that there's this orange bar all the way around, so that's the margin. The margin is typically used to separate elements from other elements, and then whereas padding, think about making it like a marshmallow more and more puffy. Like it's not space around the marshmallow, it is the marshmallow. So that's what padding is. And then finally inside we have the actual element height and width. So the height is 18 px and the width is 787 pixels. So if we wanted, we can change those here as well. So I can change the width to be like 240 px. And you'll see that because the display is set to block, it'll still fill up this whole row. However, like the actual element width is going to be constrained to 240 px. And the same goes for height. I can make it span a larger height. So if I set the height to be like also 240 px, now it's going to be this big square. Alright, let's look at another thing we can do. So I'm going to set the float property. So float is really special. It'll ignore collisions with all elements and then try and float to a particular side of the page. So if I try and float right, you'll see that it floats to the right and it ignores collisions with this other object even though it's clearly colliding with it. They're both spanning the top right at the same time. So float is to be used with caution because it can create kind of a messy layout. So preferably you'd find a better way to do that. If you wanted these to be side by side like that, you would probably set them to be display inline and then give them like a specific width. Alright, so let's copy all these and then add them to our real CSS so that they persist. So I'll refresh that and then there it is again. Great. I'm just going to make hello world say something longer so we can look at some more CSS. Alright, so now it just is really long. Okay, so if I shrink the height of this guy, you'll notice what happens when it gets too small. Basically it overflows and it's not scrollable or anything. So the way we can fix that with CSS is we can add a style for overflow, and then we can set it to auto. So that just means that if it's going to overflow, then scroll. And so you can see now we have this nice scroll bar. Another thing we could do is we could set it to overflow scroll. So what that'll do is make place for a scroll bar even if there is nothing to scroll. So like right now it has a scroll horizontal, even though I can't scroll horizontally. And then the vertical scroll bar remains. So this is not desirable, so typically you want to set this to auto and only show the scroll bar if you need to. I guess it depends on your app design, but this is the one I prefer. Also overflow has a X and a Y, so I could just set the Y here since it's only the Y that needs to scroll. So yeah, we'll copy those and then make those changes so that they persist again. Alright, and as far as moving forward and learning more styles, what I would do is just Google whatever you want to do, like center text within a div, or vertically aligned div within a div, whatever like that. Just Google that and you'll find some Stack Overflow post or something. Or if you're really motivated, you can just go and read through all of these CSS things. There aren't too many of them, honestly. Yeah, because CSS is pretty important for a site's reputation. People like using sites that look good, and employers like hiring people that can write CSS. So not like exclusively, but it's like a nice bonus. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a good overview of what you can do and sort of like the workflow of how you might approach this. Definitely work on your own project, trying to learn this stuff. That'll probably be the quickest way to learn. Just encounter a problem, try and find the solution, and I think over time you'll definitely get better. That's how I learned CSS, just by doing projects. So leave a like if you enjoyed this video, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I always love hearing guys' feedback. If you're new to this channel, consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next video.